The 4-ton neighbor. What if giant sloths never went extinct? You are running exactly 17 minutes late for the most important performance review of your career, and the reason you are about to be fired is currently leaning against your garage door, weighing 4,000 kilograms and smelling faintly of fermented swamp grass and old, wet carpet. You look out your second-story window, and instead of the familiar asphalt of your suburban cul-de-sac, you see a literal wall of coarse, reddish-brown hair that seems to vibrate with every slow, rhythmic breath the creature takes. This is not a biological anomaly or some high-budget movie prop left behind by a film crew. This is just a typical Tuesday morning in a world where the Megatherium, the giant ground sloth, never went extinct. We like to think of history as a series of human triumphs and political decisions, but our entire physical reality go from the depth of our house foundations to the very height of our ceiling socket would be fundamentally impossible if we actually had to share the sidewalk with these 6-meter-tall titans. We assume we are the masters of the modern landscape, but if the giant sloths still roamed the Americas, we would just be the small, frantic neighbors trying to navigate our lives around a 4-ton biological roadblock that doesn't even know we exist. When you take a moment to look at a modern city, you are looking at a world meticulously built for the human scale. Our doors are 2 meters high because we are rarely taller than that. Our cars are made of thin, lightweight sheet metal because we don't expect them to be sat upon by an animal the size of a small house. Our gardens are delicate arrangements of flowers and manicured lawns designed for aesthetics, not for high-volume herbivore grazing. But if you take a 6-meter-tall creature that weighs as much as 2 heavy-duty pickup trucks and drop it into that environment, the entire architecture of human life doesn't just change, it collapses. The Megatherium was a biological powerhouse, a tank with claws the size of scythes and a reach that could peel the reinforced shingles off a suburban roof just to see if there were any tasty climbing vines underneath. In this exploration, we are going to dive into the messy, expensive, and utterly strange reality of modern life shared with these prehistoric survivors. We will look at how our highways would have to be rebuilt from the subgrade up, and how the very legal code of our society would have to change to accommodate an animal that can accidentally demolish a bus stop just by leaning on it for a quick nap. And most importantly, we are going to uncover the hidden reason why your favorite fruits, like the avocado, only exist today because these giants were there to eat them and move them across the landscape. We often feel like the most important species on the planet, but in a world with giant sloths, we are just the ones responsible for cleaning up the 100-pound mess they leave on the driveway. But the real nightmare isn't just seeing one blocking your car. It's what actually happens to your bank account when you try to sloth-proof your life. Imagine your morning routine in this alternative reality. You wake up to a low-frequency thrumming that makes the water in the glass on your nightstand ripple, like that famous scene in Jurassic Park. Except this isn't a movie, and there's no T-Rex. Itoko's just the neighborhood sloth, Barnaby, deciding to scratch his back against the corner of your house. You grab your coffee and immediately check the Sloth Tracker app on your phone. This isn't an optional app for nature lovers. Itoko's a mandatory piece of public safety technology for anyone living in the suburbs. The app shows a large, glowing orange blip hovering directly over your property. You look out the back window and realize that your latest investment in sloth-proofing has failed miserably. Most people in this world spend upwards of $15,000 on heavy-duty, reinforced grade-A steel fencing, often topped with non-lethal but highly irritating ultrasonic emitters. But even that isn't enough to stop a determined Megatherium that smells a particularly succulent patch of clover or a row of ornamental hydrangeas in your backyard. You see the creature sitting on its massive haunches, using its thick, muscular tail as a third leg to create a tripod of stability that can withstand high winds and human interference. Its claws are easily 30 centimeters long, curved like massive meat hooks, and designed for pulling down the heavy branches of ancient forests. Right now, though, those claws are delicately plucking the copper gutters off your neighbor Roko's roof because they happen to be in the way of some particularly delicious ivy. You don't call the police, because what are they going to do? You call the local municipal sloth warden. The sloth warden is a specialized government official, part animal control officer, and part heavy machinery operator. You have to wait for them to arrive because you absolutely cannot just honk your horn at a 4-ton animal. To a Megatherium, your car is a shiny, noisy toy that it might accidentally flatten if it gets startled or, worse, if it thinks the car is a rival male. You are stuck in a weird kind of domestic limbo, watching a giant finish its breakfast while you miss your conference call. This relatability is the core of life with giants. We think of megafauna as something you see on a distant safari, something majestic and untouchable. But when they are in your driveway, they are just a massive, slow-moving inconvenience. Your backyard isn't just a place for a grill and a swing set. Itoko's a high-maintenance fortress. In this world, the home improvement industry is dominated by companies like SlothStop and TitanGuard. They sell motion-activated scent sprayers that emit the concentrated smell of a smilodon, the ancient saber-toothed cat, which is one of the few things that can make a sloth feel uneasy. They sell sloth bags, which are essentially giant bean bags you place in your yard to encourage the animals to sleep away from your foundation. Yet, despite all the high-tech deterrents, sometimes a sloth just decides that your garage door is the perfect height for a deep tissue back scratch. You hear the metal groaning and the wood frame splintering as 4 tons of muscle and bone lean into the structure with the force of a slow-moving tectonic plate. You just sigh and call your insurance agent, knowing that sloth-related structural failure is a standard, albeit incredibly expensive, rider on every homeowner's policy in the hemisphere. A single giant sloth can eat over 100 pounds of vegetation in a single day, which means your neighbor Roko's entire $3,000 landscaping budget can vanish into one stomach in the span of a single afternoon. That landscape budget is nothing compared to the billions we spend just keeping our streets from caving in under their feet. If we move from the backyard to the city at large, the urban planning challenges become staggering. Our current infrastructure would simply disintegrate under the footfalls of a healthy Megatherium population. Standard asphalt roads in our world are only a few inches thick, designed to handle the weight of cars and the occasional heavy truck that distributes its weight across 18 wheels. But a giant sloth is a different beast entirely. It puts a massive amount of concentrated pressure on a very small surface area with its knuckles and its massive hind feet. In a world where these animals are common, highways would have to be reinforced with deep concrete pilings and thick steel mesh grids to prevent the ground from simply collapsing into a sinkhole every time a sloth crosses the street. We would see the rise of sloth Lenisoko-dedicated, high-durability corridors painted in bright, reflective green that run alongside every major road. These aren't for cars or bicycles. They are designed to funnel the annual sloth migration through the city without them wandering into the path of a semi-truck. A collision between a 4-ton sloth and a 40-ton truck is a multi-million-dollar catastrophe that would shut down a major interstate for days, requiring industrial cranes just to clear the scene. But the real trouble for a city isn't what occurs happening on the surface. Itoko's what lies beneath the pavement. Giant sloths are natural, instinctive diggers. Their ancestors spent millions of years excavating massive paleoburrows, some of which were so large that a human can walk through them today without crouching. In a modern urban environment, this means that our underground utilities, our core fiber optic cables, our water mains, and our high-voltage electrical grid core in a state of constant, existential danger. A single Megatherium deciding to dig a cool spot to sleep in the shade of a skyscraper could inadvertently sever the high-speed internet connection for an entire financial district. This would force a total, global redesign of how we handle utilities. Instead of burying cables a few feet down in plastic pipes, we would have to encase them in Megatherium-grade steel conduits or bury them 30 feet deep, well below the reach of even the most determined sloth claws. Every time a new building is constructed, the foundation work doesn't just account for the weight of the structure. It has to account for the potential of a giant sloth attempting to burrow underneath the basement to escape the summer heat. A giant slothico's claw isn't just a defensive weapon. It is a biological pickaxe that can puncture a steel gas line like it is a cheap soda can. Think about the visual aesthetic of a city built for giants. Your park benches aren't made of wood or thin aluminum. They are solid blocks of cast iron or reinforced concrete bolted 4 feet into the ground. Your streetlights aren't slender poles. They are thick, tapered columns designed to withstand a literal ton of lateral pressure because sloths love to lean on things when they are tired. The signs in the city would be mounted much higher than they are now. Otherwise, they would be stripped off the poles by passing giants. Itoko's a world of heavy-duty everything. The very texture of the city would feel more brutalist, more reinforced, more permanent. Even the way we park our cars would change. You would never park a car on the street overnight without a sloth Kajiyoko, a reinforced metal structure that slides over the vehicle to prevent it from being stepped on or used as a headrest. The cost of living in such a city would be significantly higher, with a mega tax applied to every citizen to pay for the constant repairs to the hardened infrastructure. And if you think a gas leak caused by a claw is a nightmare, wait until you see what happens to your dinner plate when the sloths aren't there to do their jobs. Now, let's consider the economy of your kitchen. If you love avocados, you owe your entire culinary existence to the giant sloth. In our world, the avocado is what biologists call an evolutionary ghost. It evolved to have a massive, hard seed specifically so that it could be swallowed whole by giant megafauna like the Megatherium. The sloth would eat the fruit, walk for 20 miles, and then deposit the seed in a massive pile of high-quality, pre-processed fertilizer. When the giant sloths went extinct 10,000 years ago, the avocado should have followed them into oblivion. It only survived because early humans stepped in and began cultivating them. But in a world where the sloths never left, the avocado economy would be one of the most stable and massive industries on the planet. Megatherium would be the primary mobile planting machines for the entire southern hemisphere. We wouldn't just have human-managed avocado farms. We would have sloth-managed forests. The giant sloths would be the natural stewards of the ecosystem, moving seeds for dozens of different fruit species from papayas to chocolatioko across the entire continent. The economic impact of this biological partnership would be immense. Agriculture would have to be sloth-integrated. Instead of huge, fenced-off monoculture fields that try to keep nature out, we would see sloth path farming, where orchards are designed with wide, reinforced aisles that allow the giants to pass through freely. They would eat the overripe fruit that falls to the ground, effectively doing the job of pruning, pest control, and fertilizing all at once. Farmers might actually compete to attract sloths to their land, seeing them as a free, biological labor force that maintains the health of the soil and ensures a diverse crop for the next generation. However, this partnership comes with a terrifying level of risk. You cannot control where a sloth goes or how long it stays. An entire Yoroko's crop of high-value, export-grade fruit could be wiped out in a single afternoon if a small group of Megatherium decides to hunker down in one section of the orchard for a nap. The avocado economy would be a high-stakes, high-reward gamble, dictated entirely by the unpredictable whims of 4-ton herbivores. We would feel a deep, spiritual connection to these creatures, Sokokoa, sense of stewardship mixed with a healthy dose of primal fear. If the sloths were to disappear in this alternative timeline, the ecological collapse would be immediate and devastating. We would lose the natural dispersal of our forests, the health of our topsoil, and the very foundation of our food security. The giant sloth wouldn't just be an animal we admire from a distance. It would be a pillar of the global economy. The value of a single healthy sloth to the environment would be calculated in the millions of dollars. But while the economy relies on their hunger, our justice system has to deal with the inevitable trail of destruction they leave in their wake. How do you govern a world where your neighbor can accidentally crush your roof while looking for a snack? The legal code of our world would have to be entirely rewritten from the ground up. We currently have laws for pets and laws for livestock, but we don't really have a legal framework for a 4-ton neighbor that isn't owned by anyone but has an ancient, biological right to roam. In this alternative history, every law student would have to master the Megatherium legal code. This would include things like sloth damage insurance, which would likely be a federally mandated program similar to Social Security. If a sloth destroys your property, you don't sue the sloth, and you don't necessarily sue the city. There would be a collective national fund, paid for by a Megatherium tax on every paycheck, that covers the cost of repairing the infrastructure and private property damaged by the giants. Public safety would be a matter of intense education from a very young age. Children in this world wouldn't just learn how to look both ways before crossing the street. They would learn the sloth distance rule before they even know how to read. You never walk behind a sloth, because their tails are powerful enough to shatter a human femur without the sloth even noticing. You never stand between a sloth and its food source. While they are generally non-aggressive, a simple, slow movement of their massive arm to shoo away a fly could be fatal to a human being. In high-density urban areas like New York City, Chicago, or Tokyo, there would be sloth sirens mounted on every street corner. If a giant sloth wanders off a designated sloth lane and into a crowded plaza like Times Square, the entire area would be cordoned off by emergency responders. This isn't because the sloth is a monster out to hurt people, but because the sheer physical presence of a 4-ton animal in a space designed for 2-legged humans is a recipe for accidental tragedy. Imagine the tension of a 4-ton animal entering a crowded subway station or a busy shopping mall. The open loop here is genuinely terrifying. Gakaho, do you safely remove a creature that weighs as much as an elephant from a confined underground space without hurting it or the thousands of people around it? The logistics of urban sloth extraction would be a highly specialized and prestigious field of emergency services. It would involve massive, industrial-strength cranes, specialized scent-based lures, and potent sedatives that have to be administered with the precision of a surgeon. A single mistake during an extraction could lead to a building collapse or a mass casualty event. This is why in cities like Tokyo, the architecture is specifically designed with sloth vents and emergency egress corridors that are large enough to let a giant through if it accidentally takes a wrong turn. In some states, it is actually illegal to honk your car horn at a sloth, because a startled 4-ton animal is essentially a wrecking ball with a panic attack. The legal rights of the sloth would be a constant point of political debate. Do they have the right to occupy a public park even if it prevents a local festival from happening? Can a developer be sued if they build a shopping center on an ancient sloth migration path? We would have to decide, as a species, how much of our own convenience and property rights we are willing to sacrifice to keep these giants alive. The Megatherium Protection Act would be the most important piece of legislation in human history, defining the boundaries between our civilization and theirs. This legal chaos reaches its breaking point when a giant decides to take a tour of the most crowded cities on Earth, and you realize that your ears and your skin are telling you the giant is coming long before you ever see it. Latokos talk about the sensory experience of this world, because it is a common mistake to think that a giant sloth would be quiet just because it moves slowly. The reality is the exact opposite. Every single step a Megatherium takes is a major physical event. You Donacot just hear the footfall. You feel it in your chest, a deep, subsonic vibration that travels through the bedrock. It echoes a rhythmic thump shudder, thump shudder that can be felt from blocks away. In a quiet suburban neighborhood at night, the arrival of a sloth sounds like a slow-motion earthquake. Then there are the vocalizations. While we don't know for certain what they sounded like, their massive throat structures suggest they could produce deep, guttural grunts and low-frequency rumbles that can rattle the windows in their frames. Itoko's a sound that feels less like an animal and more like the earth itself is groaning. The air around a sloth would feel different, too. These animals are massive thermal engines, radiating an incredible amount of body heat that you can feel from several feet away. They carry the pungent, earthy scent of the deep wild into the very heart of the concrete jungle. Itoko's a mix of ancient dust, fermented vegetation, and the sharp, musk-like smell of an animal that doesn't exactly have a grooming routine. The world would be louder, more tactile, and much more physically imposing. You wouldn't just see a sloth, you would experience it with every one of your senses. The gentle giant myth would be a constant point of debate in this world. On one hand, sloths are slow and generally uninterested in humans. They don't hunt us. They don't see us as rivals or prey. But gentle is a very relative term when you weigh 4,000 kilograms. A sloth taps you because you're annoying it, and you end up in the intensive care unit. This creates a strange and fascinating social dynamic. There would be tame urban sloths that have become completely habituated to human presence, perhaps even lingering around certain bakeries or grocery stores where they know they can get a handout of overripe bananas. These individuals would be like massive, slow-moving stray dogs. People in the neighborhood would give them names like Barnaby or Truffle and treat them as local mascots, even as they grumble about the damage to their fences. But the wild sloths, the ones that migrate through from the deep, protected forests, would be a completely different story. They would be unpredictable, easily spooked by the neon lights and the screeching of subway brakes, and much more prone to defensive behavior. This brings us back to the ecological cost of coexistence. In a world of shrinking green spaces and expanding human cities, how do you feed a population of giants that each require hundreds of pounds of high-quality vegetation every single day? The green belts around our cities wouldn't just be for weekend hikers and weekend picnics. They would be essential, high-calorie feeding grounds. We would have to purposefully plant fast-growing, nutrient-dense trees and shrubs to keep the sloths from turning to our ornamental gardens or our public parks. There would be a constant tension between urban expansion and the preservation of the sloth range. Every new housing development would be a political battleground between those who want more affordable homes and those who point out that the proposed land is a critical feeding corridor for the giants. We would have to ask ourselves, are we willing to live in smaller, more crowded apartments if it means the 4-ton neighbor still has a place to eat? Ancient sloth dung has been found in caves preserved for over 10,000 years, so if we don't clean it up today, your morning commute will literally be paved with history. And that brings us to the messy, unglamorous reality of waste management. This is the part people rarely think about when they imagine alternative histories full of majestic creatures. A 4-ton herbivore produces a staggering, almost incomprehensible amount of biological waste. A single Megatherium might leave behind 100 pounds of dung in a single sitting. In a natural forest, this is a miracle of fertilization and seed dispersal. In the middle of a paved city street or on the sidewalk in front of a high-end boutique, it is a major sanitation crisis. Modern sanitation departments would need megafauna units, specialized teams equipped with heavy-duty loaders and high-pressure steam cleaners just to keep the streets passable. However, the waste wouldn't just be thrown away. In a world with giant sloths, their dung would be one of the most valuable commodities in the agricultural sector. Sloth dung is an incredible fertilizer, rich in nitrogen and packed with pre-processed seeds that are ready to germinate. There would be an entire multi-billion-dollar industry built around the collection, processing, and sale of sloth waste. Your high-end organic vegetables at the local market would likely be branded as grown with genuine Megatherium gold. It turns the majesty of the creature into a very grounded, very messy, but very profitable industrial process. The brown fleet of sanitation trucks would be as common a sight as garbage trucks are in our world, roaming the streets with specialized vacuum systems designed to mine the city's streets for this biological treasure. The public health regulations surrounding this would be intense. You couldn't just leave a sloth pile on your lawn for more than an hour without facing a significant fine. There would be neighborhood dung watch groups that coordinate with the sanitation department. The smell of the city would be fundamentally different, a constant underlying scent of industrial-scale composting that would be as much a part of the urban experience as the smell of exhaust fumes or street food. But once the streets are clean and the giants have moved on to the next feeding ground, you realize that the world we built to accommodate them is actually a world built for something even bigger and more armored than a sloth. As we look at this transformed world, we see a humanity that has been forced to become more patient, more resilient, and more humble. We are no longer the undisputed, unchecked masters of the environment. We share it. We have built our lives, our laws, and our very cities around the slow, heavy, and often destructive rhythm of the giant sloth. Our architecture is stronger, our roads are deeper, our legal systems are more complex, and our sense of community is tied to the preservation of a creature that could crush us without even noticing. We have found a way to live with the 4-ton neighbor, even if it means being late for work, paying higher taxes, and dealing with a 100-pound mess on the sidewalk. We have learned that being the dominant species doesn't mean having total control. It means having the wisdom to adapt to the giants that were here long before we were. But the giant sloth is just the beginning of the story. If the Megatherium survived the end of the last ice age, it is almost certain that other giants survived alongside them. Imagine a world where the giant sloth share the reinforced highways with massive, armored creatures the size and shape of a Volkswagen Beetle, covered in a bone-hard shell that can deflect a Predator's teeth. How would the presence of those biological tanks have changed our early transportation systems? Would we have ever invented the wheel if we had to share our primitive paths with animals that could crush a wooden cart just by walking over it? This opens up a whole new set of questions about how megafauna shaped the very trajectory of human technology and the evolution of our tools. The presence of one giant changes everything, but a world full of them creates a history so radically different from our own that we might barely recognize the humans who live there. If you want to understand how a world of armored giants would have forced us to completely reinvent the way we move, you have to look at the hidden, crushing impact of the Glyptodon on the ancient roads of the Americas. What other secrets of our modern technology are actually just forgotten adaptations to the giants we lost?